Audible is my road trip companion.
It's kind of my quiet alone time.
Audible is a routine for me.
It's like a fun night school for adults.
I could easily be seduced into locking myself in a place where I do nothing but listen to books.
I never was interested in historical fiction before, but I'm obsessed with it now.
There are a lot of classic and big titles that I feel like I've missed out. Since I don't have time to read, might as well listen.
If I want to catch up on the news or history or learn what's going on in the world, I can download a book and listen to it.
Because I listened to her story over and over again, I made the decision to go ahead and follow my own dream, which was to help other veterans.
I think there's 180 books in my library now. It changes your perspective. It makes you a different person.
It's true. It's so true.
Download Audible and start listening today.
Hi, I'm Zan Romanoff, and I'll be moderating today's panel. Thank you all for tuning in to the 25th Annual Festival of Books and for our virtual event, Young Adult Fiction, Love, Struggles, and What Lies Between, featuring Brandy Colbert, Stonewall Award-winning author of 6 books, including her most recent, The Voting Booth, Jennifer De Leon, editor of the anthology Wise Latinas and Don't Ask Me Where I'm From, which is her debut, and Shaun David Hutchinson, author of 8 young adult novels, including his latest, The State of Us. Please remember to support your local independent bookstores during the festival and always. Signed copies of these authors' books are available through Mrs. Nelson's Book Company. Let's now welcome Brandy Colbert, Shaun David Hutchinson, and Jennifer De Leon. Here you guys are.
Hi.
Normally, we get to do a little green room hang, but this is the first time I see everyone's faces, and it's very exciting. So I'm going to start by having you guys all just pitch your books really quickly in case anyone watching today hasn't had the chance to read all of them. They're excellent, I recommend, but just to give readers a little taste. And we'll start with you, Brandy.
All right. Hi, I'm Brandy Colbert, and this is my latest book. It's called The Voting Booth, and it's about these 2 teenagers, Marva and Duke. They set out on election day to get their votes in, and Marva sees Duke having some troubles with his voting registration, and then they set off on this whirlwind day of just trying to get their vote in. It's a book about voting, but it's also about community, and there's some romance and an internet cat in there as well.
Love the internet cat. Shaun, do you want to go next?
Sure. My book is The State of Us, and unlike Brandy, I don't have a copy to show because I'm unprepared, I guess. And it is about Andre and Dean, the sons of the Republican and Democratic candidates for president, who meet in the green room before a debate and fall in love. And it's funny because I called it the politics book all throughout the writing of it, but it's really a book about families. So.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we'll talk about is these are all, to a certain extent, politics books, but they are definitely also romance books, family books. I mean, they're teenage books, right? So Jen, will you pitch Don't Ask Me Where I'm From for us?
Yes, I'd love to. So Don't Ask Me Where I'm From tells the story of 15-year-old Liliana Cruz, and she is trying to fit in at her new school, which is part of a METCO program, which is a desegregation program. So she takes a bus for an hour every day from Boston to a wealthy, predominantly white suburb. And so she's got boy drama, best friend drama. She's got drama with her mom, her little brothers, and her father is missing. But early on in the book, she learns that he's not really missing. He's been deported. And up until this moment, she had no idea that her parents were undocumented. So it kind of sets her off on this quest to learn about what happened to her father and learn more about herself and her history.
Can I say how beautiful that cover is, by the way?
Oh, thank you.
It is beautiful.
Elena Garnu, she did a great job. She's from Barcelona. And I just thank you for saying that. I'll pass on the note.
Yeah, it is absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, and maybe we'll stay on Jen. I'm going to ask each of you individual questions, and then we'll get into sort of some group discussion, and hopefully we can just sort of have a conversation between all of us. But Jen, reading your book made me think of something that I've heard of as I started working in activism, is people sometimes say, well, I'm not interested in politics. And one of the responses is, well, politics are interested in you. And I feel like a lot of this book is about Liliana learning that she wants to be 15. She's like, yeah, she wants to have a cute boyfriend and be what she thinks of as normal. But politics are very interested in her. And so I'm curious how you thought about balancing this sort of political aspect of her life unavoidably with, that sort of just deeply teenage stuff.
Right. No, it's a great question. And I think you're absolutely right. In some ways, she just wants to live her life and fit in and hang out with her friends. And boom, the crack in the windshield is the fact that her father has been deported. And so suddenly she doesn't have that privilege of kind of just living her life. She has to really come face to face with these questions of her family's story, her family's background, why they came to the United States, why they're undocumented, and what their path forward is. And she's hiding that, right? So she's at this new school and she's got this big secret and it's hanging on her shoulders. And throughout the book, she's really trying to assimilate and kind of, like you said, keep the politics like separate. Like, she wants, like on her plate, she wants like the French fries in one area and the chicken on the other side and the greens on the other side. She just wants things compartmentalized. But she ultimately makes a choice toward the end of the book and throughout her journey to mesh them all together, because that's how life is. So she finds her voice and she goes from being someone who wants to assimilate to really being anti-racist and aiming towards the self-actualization that we all, I think, aim for.
Hopefully, yes. And
Yes.
and she got started on it way earlier than I did, so that's nice to see. Brandy, I'm also curious about, so in your book, there's these two characters, Marva and Duke, and when we start out, Marva is like raring to go, like has been waiting her whole life to vote in this election. Duke is like, I get it, I have to, but I, again, would rather do what I think of as quote unquote normal teenage things. And I'm curious about your sort of political evolution. When you were a teenager, were you more of a Marva or more of a Duke? And has that changed at all since growing up a little bit and also since writing this book?
Oh my gosh, Zan, just putting me on blast right here. No,
I was a Duke. I was totally a Duke.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a mix of both, but I would say definitely, like, as a teenager, I've been saying, when I talk about the book, that, I grew up in a very conservative area. I grew up in the Ozark section of Missouri, for anyone who's familiar with that part of the country. Not a lot of diversity of thought there. I was raised in a Democratic household, but we were in a sea of red. And so I didn't even realize that people still protested. I was a teenager in the 90s and I thought like protesting was just something that people sort of did in the 60s and then it just went away and everything was fine. I was brought up in a household that encouraged me and my older brother to vote, and always saw my parents go to vote and went with them sometimes. And I knew that that was my duty. But I would say I was definitely more Duke. I was just like, I got to get this done. Like it's expected of me, but like it's not. I didn't understand really the implications behind voting, except that I knew a tad bit about how it had been in the South because that's where my family is from. But yeah, I was definitely more of a Duke, and I'm still not a Marva today. Marva is like way better than I could ever be, but I definitely understand the things that Marva is talking about and why she's fighting so hard for this.
Yeah. And so Shaun, for me, one of the things, like, I also write contemporary YA, and I sort of love it because being alive in the world is like research. And I also sometimes really hate it because being alive in the world is like research and it's exhausting. And your book, particularly right now, reading it in the run up to the presidential election, it's about a presidential election, felt timely in the best and worst ways. So I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about sort of how, if there are things that happened during the writing of the book that you ended up like, bringing in there or sort of influenced the way you were thinking about it, and also how you made sure to take care of yourself in the writing of the book and not be like on, CNN, Twitter, whatever, all the time.
I, like one of the things, because in writing contemporary, one of the first early comments that I would get about some of my books were, like, oh, these gay characters, their lives are too easy. And so, I very quickly had to establish, like, there's the world that we live in and then the world that, we want to live in. And so when I was writing The State of Us, I was really kind of more writing the world we want to live in. And I was kind of ignoring our current president and just how terrible, things are. because like I said, it's more a book about families than it is a book about politics. And so it was, yeah, I mean, it was really hard sort of distinguishing, like every time I would go to write something about the third party candidate who, I mean, is very clearly a Trump sort of a surrogate. Like, and my editor would push back a little and say, like, I don't know, that's a little cartoonish. I would be like, but have you seen what's actually happening? Like, have you seen what he's doing? And, you know, and so that, it was kind of difficult, but really, like, I wanted to write like in this sort of like space that doesn't exist right now. And if I had started writing it 3, 4, 5 months later, I think it would have been a much different book. But you know, that's kind of the problem with books, is you write them and a year and a half later when they come out, the world is a different place. And sometimes that works in your favor and sometimes it doesn't. And so, you know, the state of us is, it seems a little quaint right now compared to what's going on in the real world.
I mean, the real world 6 months ago seems quaint to what's compared to going on right now. So,
like every week feels like a year these days.
Mm-hmm.
It really and truly does. And it's one of the really interesting things. And we'll talk, I do want to ask you guys a little bit about technology, which features prominently in all of your books. And it's another like all sort of always evolving thing. But first, because this is something you guys have all touched on a little bit, but I want to just expand it. You know, I think people hear like, so there's 2 books about specifically about elections, and then Jen's book, which is, you know, touches on politics in all kinds of other ways. I think people hear, oh, it's a book about politics, and imagine it's going to be these sort of characters monologuing at each other. So I'm curious about how you guys thought about sort of taking those issues and making them feel really personal, and making them feel really complicated, which is, I think, something you guys all do really well in these books. Like, it's not, you know, there are certain things that I think we all agree hopefully are fundamental in terms of like wanting to respect each other and each other's identities and each other's lives. But beyond that, there are conversations and there are arguments. So how did you write those arguments into the book and make this feel, you know, personal as well as political? And I'm going to let you guys choose who goes first, whoever's ready.
I can go. Yeah, I think for me, especially like, you know, Zan, you know me personally, so you know I have no problem really talking about what's on my mind at any time. But online and, you know, in social media, I get a little shy about talking about, you know, things personally. I do a lot of retweeting and a lot of agreeing with people, but I felt like this book was really my chance to sort of just put out exactly how I feel about things. And, you know, this book really doesn't get specific about, like, there's no candidates are actually named. You don't know who's running. You don't know, you know, spoiler alert, you don't know who wins at the end of the book. But it's more about just sort of the history of voting, especially as it applies to Black Americans, and the history of voting in this country and activism and all the different ways that looks. And, you know, like you mentioned, Marva is really, you know, a kind of a model activist, and she's been doing things like canvassing and phone banking and text banking since way before she could even vote. And Duke's just like, I've got to kind of do this out of obligation to, you know, my mom's going to yell at me if I don't vote. You know, he has a brother who recently passed away who was a big activist in their community. And he's like, you know, his ghost is going to come back and haunt me, you know, if I don't vote. So he's doing it more out of obligation. But I really felt like it was a good chance to just have sort of these conversations in a book form, put down the ways, I guess, that, or put down things that I'm thinking about all the time that I'm not necessarily expressing in a public forum. And so anyone who really wants like a mind into how I'm, like a peek into how I'm thinking, can just pick up one of my books. But especially this would be definitely my most political one. And it's, you know, it's all me pretty much. So
there's nothing more embarrassing than that. Like, yeah, it's like, you want to know what I'm thinking about? There's 900 pages worth of fiction on the shelves.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I look at it like, you know, especially with this book, because I think it is the most overt book that's connected to politics, even though, you know, like being queer, like almost all of my books are labeled sort of political in some way, shape, or form. But for me, like, especially when I approach this one, like, I feel like my job isn't to tell anyone, especially young people, what to think. What I wanted to show them is like how to think critically, like how to look at any issue, no matter what it is, and think about it critically. And so, like, when I was choosing what issues and you know, I was going to, you know, sort of focus on, and there are a lot. I chose the ones that I thought that I had the best sort of outlook on. Like I was the most knowledgeable about and could do the most justice to. And so, that's obviously when it comes to queer rights. And also, growing up in Florida, gun rights I'm really passionate about, and it's a really nuanced sort of thing. And so, I sort of went after those and tried to look at them from every possible angle, even though I feel like my views are really well known when it comes to how much I despise guns. But yeah, I don't want to tell kids what to think. I want to help them think critically so that they can take that and then apply it to anything that they run up against in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think, there's the narrator, Liliana, and then there's me, the author. And of course, I have so much that I want to say and infuse into the book. And even my editor had to point out all these moments where she was like, okay, this is a little authorial, this is you intruding. Remember, this is the character. I think because I had so much that I wanted to express, and you can't just use the protagonist as, your spokesperson. So once I kind of settled in and really got into Liliana's head and heart and mind, I realized, okay, she's going through this. I have to filter the entire experience through her. But one of my main goals, I guess, in writing this book was to have, this counter narrative to what is being expressed in the media, and the narratives that were being spewed essentially through so much of what the president is saying. Only rapists and drug addicts come crossing the border, all this. So I really wanted to have a counter narrative to that and show readers, especially young people, that someone sitting beside you in class, could be going through this and have a family going through this, and you might not even know, you might not have any experience with that, but this book might be a window into that. And I guess the other piece too is that Liliana faces so many microaggressions, and she's constantly code switching, and she's literally moving from her neighborhood to this PWI, predominantly white institution, on the daily. And it's so taxing. She's exhausted spiritually from having to code switch. And I think that just that fact that she has to go to another neighborhood to go to a quote unquote better school and get a better education already raises questions of politics and schools and zoning and school budgets and wait, why is this necessary? So I guess I tried to put it in the book, but not be too overt with it so that readers would be turned off. I don't know. I hope I succeeded.
Yeah, I mean, I love, especially obviously as a writer, I really loved how careful you were with Liliana's language. When she's talking to a friend from her neighborhood and the friend's like, you say literally a lot now. Or when she's at school and one of the Metco kids says, I'm hip, right? As a way of sort of expressing I'm good. And she's like, oh my God, you speak my language. And I felt that, where you're like, oh, I can speak my language with you. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about, because also you sort of brought up the idea of this sort of conversation in the culture that, immigrants are criminals, which is offensive on the face of it. But so I loved, seeing the way this family loves and takes care of each other, was so moving. And it's one of my favorite scenes also in Brandy's book when Duke meets Marva's dad. And I feel like there's this just connection between these, Black men trying to talk to each other about their lives and experiences and wanting to take care of the next generation. So yeah, I'd love if you could all talk about the families. I know, Shaun, yours is a book about family, and writing about, again, intergenerational conflicts and intergenerational love and how we try and figure out how to have these conversations with each other. So yeah, how did you you have these characters, how did you build in the families around them, and what were you looking at in terms of, those characters, what they could bring to your main character's story? Shaun, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I think for me, especially with the dean, who is the Republican candidate's son. So like I said, I grew up in Florida. I grew up in the South, and I have my fair share of not just, like Trump supporters in my family, but I mean, just like flat out, just there's so much racism in my family. There's so much intolerance in my family, that I grew up around. And then I grew up with my mom, who is very sort of liberal and forward thinking. But so when I was building, especially Dean's family, what I was looking at was this idea of how do you take someone who is at odds with their family and find a space where you can still love them? Can you? Because I feel like that's something like when I go home to visit my mom and my stepdad is a Trump supporter. And the last time we were there, we had some very loud words, but I still love him because he's still my dad. And it's like these things are in conflict. And so when I was building Dean's family, that's the conflict that I was creating, was how do you love the people in your life when you are so diametrically opposed in their beliefs? And that was what, Dean's journey was really all about. And when it came to creating Dre's family, I wanted to create a loving family where, it's so funny because he just doesn't want his dad to run simply because he loves his dad so much and he misses him and he just wants to hang out more. And it's this, kind of selfish reason, but it's also a really beautiful reason. And so I wanted to create this family for Dre that was so supportive of him in every way, shape, and form. And, and it's interesting to me that conflict comes from that support. Because as a teenager, you're trying to break out in different ways.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciated also that Dre is comes from this family that really supports him, and so he's he's a little bit like Duke, right? He's I understand why politics is important, but I have a makeup channel. I'm a little busy.
Yeah, no, he's got his life. He was more popular than his dad before his dad started running for the presidency. And so, yeah, he's just I just want him to do makeup. That's all I care about. And, and it's at the same time, he is political just by who he is. And, and he can't escape that. And so it's interesting, even though he is sometimes at odds with his dad's candidacy, they're still they don't try and rein him in at all. They just let Dre be Dre, and they never try and stop that. And seeing that at odds with Dean's character and Dean's family, who say they support him, but then when he really needs them, they're like, nah, no, thank you. And I really wanted to show that.
Yeah, totally. Brandy and Jen, thoughts on building in family and family love and family conflict?
Yeah. Go for it.
Sure. I was just going to say, first of all, Dan, thank you for bringing up how, Duke has that, so they have lunch with Marva's dad. That was one of my favorite parts to write. And, I feel like at one point, if Duke doesn't say it on the page, at least I was thinking it in my head, that you can kind of tell that he's I kind of wish my dad was more like this, because Duke's family is really having a lot of trouble. Like I mentioned, his older brother died by gun violence, which was one of sort of the initiatives he was taking on, before he was killed in their former community. And then the family ended up moving, and his parents got divorced, and he's got Duke's in the middle. And so he had his older brother, and then he has a younger sister, and they were both, his younger sister is shaping up to be the kind of activist that his older brother was. And Duke, meanwhile, feels like, what am I even doing here in the middle? I just want to hang out with my friends and get high and go play, gigs with my band. But his family has a lot to work out in the book. It was really satisfying to get to sort of draw out some of, have those discussions about why they're hurting and how his, Duke and Ida, his little sister, don't like the way that, their dad is really acting, and he's just angry, and he tells them, it's because I'm worried about losing you two. Also, I've already lost a son. I didn't do enough to protect him. So there's a lot going on in Duke's family, but I feel like it really works out in satisfying ways. And then, Marva, she's got a really supportive mom and dad. They are pretty chill. They're actually you're a little too uptight, actually, girl. She has to, she and Duke end up skipping school, which I've heard about from a few adults. I'm sorry, it's just what happened. They had to get the vote in, but they end up skipping school, and her dad is just okay, maybe you should have skipped school before now. Just chill out a little bit. But also, they're really cool. They've instilled this sense of duty in her and have supported her as she goes along. They're all for all the campaigning she was doing before the election, and they just really support her, both as just their daughter, and then she talks about how her family celebrates Juneteenth every year, and she explains it to her white, I guess, ex-boyfriend. But at the time, her boyfriend, in a flashback, she explains it to him. So I feel like they both have support from their families. It just sort of comes in different ways, and I think it's really shaped who they are. And through the book, they also sort of come to realize all those different ways that it's made them who they are.
Yeah. Just this conversation is so rich, and I'm thinking about how politics is such a treasure house of stories, essentially. And I'll be honest, when I was growing up, I really thought politics was like something that was over there, like separate, like it only had to do with history or voting, or like it was black and white, like like that's just how I thought about it. And my first job out of college, I worked as a congressional aide for a US congressman, and you cannot get more political than that job, right? And so I worked there for a year, and I'll be honest, I didn't like it so much. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to switch gears and do something that has nothing to do with politics. I'm going to be an elementary school teacher in California. And I'm like, there is no job, right? That's like more political than being a teacher in the United States. I mean, I had students who spoke languages like from all over the world. They had all sorts of stories, and their parents had stories and histories that they had inherited and had come to the Bay Area from Vietnam, from Mexico, I mean, all over. And it really kind of like gave me this like intense education in international relations, and so for the character in my book, Liliana, she's been kind of in a bubble up until now, and now because her father's been deported, now this is the occasion for her to ask these questions. And the crazy thing is that a lot of people might have some misconceptions and misunderstandings about why people are crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, and so the irony is that so much of the situation in Central America, the current situation, is a manifestation of decades long of, really horrible foreign policy that the U.S. Government is responsible for, essentially. And so I think like once you peel the onion, you just discover more and more stories and history. And it's one book, 300 pages. Like I could have gone like much deeper, but hopefully they'll be, actually my next book is set in Guatemala. So it tells the story of a teen who's super into fashion in Guatemala. But of course there are politics involved, because politics is in everything.
Yeah, and I feel like that's definitely something that, is so clear reading these books. Yes, they're all about the ways in which like our lives are political, and we're better off acknowledging that and dealing with it than sort of continuing to pretend like, no, it's fine. But I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some craft stuff. Because one of the things that was really striking to me reading these books is that, so Brandy and Shaun both have like a ticking clock. You have an election coming up. I mean, in Brandy's case, you have a voter deadline coming up. Like that book is set over one day. It's very tight. Whereas Jen, like a ton of stuff happens in the book, but I feel like the plot is really emotional, right? It's really about Liliana's journey. And so I wondered if you guys could talk about those different strategies, sort of writing with that ticking clock and then figuring how to create narrative tension that's about emotional. I mean, there's a lot of emotional tension in all the books. But, having sort of that emotional tension drive the plot of the book versus having the external structure.
I mean, if it were up to me, all of my characters would just sit around in coffee shops and talk and then make out. And like the ticking clocks actually wind up being, and I did that with my very first book. It was also set over 24 hours. It's kind of my way of taking, a really sort of general outline and going, okay, now there are stakes. And I've used it multiple times, sort of that ticking clock. I used it in We Are the Ants and At the Edge of the Universe. There's always some sort of thing that's pushing. And actually, when it comes to craft, like that's kind of how I start. Is I start with the characters and I start with, the idea of the book, and then I sit down and I go, okay, but what is driving this plot now? and then I figure it out. And like in the case of We Are the Ants, it was aliens, and in the case of The State of Us, it was the election. Because once that happens, their ability to, Dean and Dre's ability to weave in and out of each other's lives would have been severely curtailed. So yeah, it's really just my way of finding something to make me get them out of the coffee shop and do more than talk.
Yeah, I'm similar when I'm writing books. I'm like, there needs to be like they're not mystery books, but I'm like, there needs to be a mystery that they're solving, because otherwise, they will just sit and chat and look at each other. That's how I like to spend time.
So true. I know it makes me really respect like writers of mystery, thrillers. They just like do not hold back. And I'm like, I need to do more of that, because the coffee shop with the writing in your journal or staring. Oh my God, the staring.
Yeah, I mean, but Liliana has, because she does write in, but she writes, she stares out windows, but it's all while stuff's going on, right? It's all these bus rides to and from school that are so fraught, this time when she's in transition. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Thank you. Yeah. Because she does stare out the window, but her first time coming into the suburbs, she'd never been to the suburbs, and it I feel like there's some literature where there's the character coming to the big city for the first time, and wow, and the skyscrapers, but the suburbs have their own I don't know, there was a lot for her to comment on, let's say, and it was kind of fun writing that scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree. Like, I always say that I like my favorite movies are where people are like drinking coffee and crying. Like, I just could watch a million movies like that where nothing actually happens. And I could read a million books like that, and I could write a million books like that. But it turns out readers want some sort of plot. I would say this is definitely, maybe besides my first book point, this is like my most plot heavy book. It almost broke my brain trying to write it. Thank God for editors. So, I sort of wrote the messy first draft, got that out of the way, because a lot of this was new. I had never written dual points of view before. I had never written from the perspective of a male character before. And then, obviously I'd never written a book that took place in like 12 hours. So it was a big challenge, but after we got the messy first draft out of the way and like got the main gist of the book down, then my editor really helped me craft like a really intense outline. It was because I don't normally outline, so this was all totally new for me. But it really helped to get it down, because not only did we have to get the plot structure down, but there were like a lot of rules about voting and the election and all of that we had to make sure that we weren't sort of ignoring. So yeah, it was definitely, I would say, my most difficult book that I've written in terms of the structure, but it really taught me a lot, and I feel like it taught me to be more ambitious going forward and to really push myself in the future.
It doesn't feel like a difficult book. Like, it reads so like easily. Like, it doesn't feel like you had any trouble at all.
Oh, thank you, Shaun. Bless you for saying that, because, when you write it, you're like, all you could see is like, oh, that chapter took so much out of me, or like, that was impossible. I never thought I would get through it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Like, thank goodness readers can't like read our stress on the page.
Oh my gosh. No, it would just be red scribbles everywhere for me.
Yeah. My editor uses green, Caitlin DeLuey. She's amazing. And she purposely uses green, I think, because she knows red, it's like too intense. It's like school.
Yep.
Yeah. And I would actually love if you guys could talk a little bit about collaborating with your editors, because I think this is something that people on the other side of this don't really see. And it's something I teach writing, and consistently my students are shocked when I'm like, okay, like, let's go through my easiest book that I ever wrote. Here's how many drafts. Mm-hmm. And it's like 10 or 15, right? For the easiest book. Which is, and people really don't understand how much work it takes to get from that messy first draft to the finished draft that you end up reading, but also how much help you have along the way. So I'd love to hear, I know, Brandy, you talked about like your editor helping you outline, like what were some moments when your editor kind of stepped in or helped you see something you hadn't seen, like helped you, turn this into the book that it ultimately became?
Me or anybody?
Anybody, sorry, yes.
Okay.
Go. Anybody? I'll go. I mean,
go for it.
I love collaborating with editors. I don't think that, I would ever be able to get a book done without them. And this was the first time I collaborated with David Linker at Harper Teen. And it was very different from my other editors. It was a very sort of like back and forth, like he has definite opinions. And so like when I would turn something in and I would be like, oh, I don't know, I'm kind of feeling, like, should I do this? Should I not? And he was just like, no, or yes, do it. And I was just like, oh, okay, well, that makes my job easy. And, but what they really bring is, to me is that sort of like, I think you get tunnel vision when you write, or at least I do, like I'm so focused on like, it's all in my brain because I actually usually do, I think between like 1 and 4 drafts before something goes to copy edits. And like the biggest changes happen between the first draft and the second. And it's because I write a lot of it in my head. Like most of my drafting is done in my brain. And that doesn't always translate to the page. And so the biggest things that working with editors give me is they help me see what's on the page versus what's in my brain so that I can get what's in this head onto the page and have it make sense. And I would never get anything done without the editors that I work with.
I have to say, I relate to that so much. I feel like the number one thing my editor will be like, well, I have a question about this. And I'm like, how can you not know that? My God, it's so obvious. And then I'm like, it's because I know it and I didn't write it. Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
It's so
feel the same
true.
way.
Go for it. Yeah. I'm just like agreeing out loud, like,
No, I totally agree. I do so much writing in my head as well. And I would say the major note that I typically get from editors, and my agent's very editorial too. So anytime I turn something in, before it's placed with a publishing house, like my agent has really gone through several rounds with me typically. And, I guess I get the note that like they want more. So I think it's sort of the same thing that, Shaun and Zan are saying. It's just that like I'm drafting in my head. When I sit down to write, I typically write, anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 words because I don't write every day. And I've done so much writing in my head already that it sort of comes out, in this burst of words. But then, once I turn the draft in, I'm like, this is great, but why is this draft so short? And, my agent's always like, I love what you have here. I want more of this. So it's like really pushing myself to like pull all of that out of me. And I would say that, like Shaun said, the most work I do is from drafts 1 and 2. And I think most of that is just pulling, that extra information that I'm like for some reason hoarding, to myself, really putting that on the page.
Yeah, that's so true. It's just another one of these big myths about what it means to be an author or what that looks like. Because I really thought that, especially, once you get to the point where you and your agent shop it around and get to an editor, I thought that's it. Like you sell the book and you do maybe some stuff, but like that's it. And wow, was I wrong? Like, oh, multiple revisions and drafts and little notes, big notes, emails about this, phone calls about, I had an idea about that scene. It was very collaborative. And I, at one point, thought my editor had buyer's remorse because we had edited so much. And I'm like, oh, and you need writer friends to tell you like, oh no, that's normal. Like that's what you do. That's their job. You're basically like, they wouldn't have a job without you. And like to reframe it that way is like just mind blowing because I guess I'm still recovering from like English teachers with red pen and kind of like, how could you have done that? But then there were other parts of the journey that are kind of like, I guess an opportunity, like culturally, like to share some cultural, I guess, facts and habits and everything. Like there's a scene in the book where Liliana has her Thea and Theo coming over for lunch, and the mother has to pick them up from the airport first. And so I said that, so my editor was saying, how can they go to the airport, pick them up, get all their bags, come back and be at the table by noon? And I'm like, why does she think it's noon? And like, she kept pushing back on this. And then I thought, oh no, we don't eat lunch at noon. Like, we eat lunch at like 4:00. And she was like, oh, and it was just one of these like small cultural pieces that, I thought it was an opportunity, to share on the page, and it was just like what she had in her head was not what I had in my head, but ultimately it has to be what's on the page is what matters. So yeah, we
Yeah.
bumped into a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, yes. And that actually really ties into something I wanted to ask about because I think, we talk a lot about the opportunity of representation and how wonderful it is. And it's thrilling, right, to have Latina girls on book covers, Black girls, queer kids, like all this stuff. But it's difficult, right, when you are the person needing to explain to your editor, like, oh no, this is actually how that works. Or when you maybe readers are like, well, that's not my experience. Like, so I wondered if you guys could talk a little bit about that, about sort of, having marginalized identities and being expected to represent everyone all the time.
Yes. Oh my gosh, 1,000%. Yes. I think of people in general. I'm a glass half full person. So I'm thinking, okay, people are excited that there's this Latinx teen on the book cover and we need more and more of these books. And here's one, right? And so there's this kind of enthusiasm that can yield this expectation. Like this one character is representing all Latinx girls in the United States. And it's like, nope, just one. And she's fictionalized, And so I do feel that in some exchanges with readers. And Liliana's mother is really into cooking Vietnamese food. And she loves making pho and like spring rolls and all this. And people somehow comment on that, like they cling to it, like, God, it's so interesting. Like, and it's like, well, yeah, people can have interests like across cultures. It's not like she's sitting there making tacos like every day in the book. And if she were, like, good for her, but that's not representing everybody. So I do think there's this kind of pressure, but again, I'm glass half full. So I think it comes from an excitement. We'll see, how I feel, hopefully 5 books down the line. I'm still a newbie. This is my debut book. So I'm all like, this is so exciting.
You can go, Brandy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with everything that Jennifer said. And also for me, as someone who grew up in a predominantly white, city, a predominantly white, state, I often heard that I wasn't, what people expected, from a Black person, that maybe I didn't sound like they expected, or I didn't listen to the kind of music they expected. But the truth is like, I grew up really with a lot of Black culture in my life because my parents knew where they were raising us, that we weren't going to be around a lot of Black people unless we were at church, on Sundays. So I feel like I always have those voices in my head, though, that there's someone that's going to be telling me, well, this, your characters aren't Black enough, or that's not how Black people act. And so that's in my head this whole time I'm writing, trying to make these characters as authentic as possible. So it's still a struggle, Jennifer said, you're a debut, but I don't know if these kind of worries sort of go away, or these thoughts go away the more you go on. I do feel like I'm becoming more comfortable with sort of the Black identity that I'm presenting in my books. But, every time like I get a review or, a tweet from like a Black reader or educator or something who's read the book, I'm just like so relieved when they say that they related to some part of it, because, that voice just hasn't gone away. And I'm not sure, I look at writer friends who I think are very confident in their identity and the identities they're writing. And they've confessed to me like, I don't feel confident in that either. So I don't know if anybody ever feels completely comfortable or, confident in what they're writing. But I'm going to keep trying, I guess, to make it as authentic as possible.
Yes, please. If you stop writing books, I will be very sad. So.
Okay, just for you, Zan, just for you.
Yeah, for me, for the white girl. Is that not?
Right. No, I agree. I fully agree with that. Never stop writing books, Brandy.
Oh, thank you. Same to everyone here, actually.
Yeah,
right,
no, 100%. And yeah, like, so I actually, like, I grew up like with so much internalized homophobia when I was coming out, I was 19, 20, and honestly through most of like my 20s, like, and that was in like the late 90s and the early 2000s when, straight acting was what every gay guy aspired to be, was to be taken as a straight person. And so like, I sort of internalized that. And it took a lot of effort to grow out of that and to put that aside. And so I worry that I am not presenting enough. Like I used to worry that like I was too gay, and now I worry that I'm not gay enough. And, and that, goes through into the books. And I wonder that, people are going to read it and be like, well, he doesn't seem very gay. And then I have issues with labeling anyway. And like my next book is a complicated love story set in space, and I called it Gays in Space. But the funny thing is like every character is queer, but nobody uses any labels. Nobody identifies at all. And that was like a really important thing to do. But it kind of goes with everything too, like mental health. Like I remember like the worst like review that I ever got was for my memoir about mental illness and coming out. And somebody was like trashing me for like that's not a realistic representation of mental illness, of depression. And I was like, but like it's my life. Like I literally went through this. Like this was literally who I was and what I was doing. And so it's just it's a weird form of gatekeeping in a way, telling people that their experiences aren't valid because they don't match everybody else's experience or even one other person's experience. And so I think what we have to remember when we go into books is like we bring as much into books as we're getting from it. Like our experiences color what we read from a book. And so we may not be taking from a book what the author necessarily intended, and that's fine too. And if like the experiences don't match up, then hopefully we've learned something new, I guess. Like I don't know, I hope.
Yeah, definitely. I love that, Shaun. It's kind of like The Danger of the Single Story, that TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie. I use that often in the classroom just to reiterate this notion of, stereotypes are essentially not bad so much as they are wrong, in the sense that they're one story, they're incomplete. They're one story of many. So writing our books and our stories is like providing more, just different iterations, different versions of life experience, and we can never have too many. But I definitely think that that's part of like being an activist now, and young people, I think in particular, are like trailblazing, but also just forging new ways of doing this. And using social media and their voices and creativity and in ways that I definitely didn't do and didn't have access to, I think, just in terms of the technology. But it cuts both ways too, because then it's also a way to spread kind of racist messaging, and it's complicated. But I definitely think that the more stories we have, the more it can kind of get people talking and moving and thinking. And so I want to be like you guys when I grow up. I want to have like multiple books and have, just more stories to talk about.
You will,
yeah,
definitely.
I feel like it's complicated is like the answer to every question that's worth asking, right? It's very complicated. And I have a million more questions for you guys, but I think we're doing reader. We have some questions that were submitted by the audience that we're going to get into. Am I right about that? If not, I will just keep. Yeah, okay. So speaking of it's complicated, I'm going to ask you guys one more question, which is about technology, which is very complicated and which you guys all talk about in really different ways in your books. So Shaun invented an app called Prometheus, which is like a private messaging app. Brandy has an Insta-famous cat that I can't believe we haven't talked about yet in her book. And Jen, has racist memes circulating around a school. So how did you guys think about sort of bringing technology into the books and how to make it feel current, but also not dated, which is impossible?
It's funny because it, is Instagram that Marva has this account for her cat on, but I never once mentioned Instagram because I think I've gone through all of my books without ever mentioning any social media site by its actual name, which makes me happy because I'm sort of one of those authors where I'm like, can I just write about the 90s forever, when like nobody had cell phones and all of that, but they're set in present day, so I have to. But Marva is sort of struggling internally because she accidentally had this um, social media account for her cat go viral, and she did not expect it. It was just sort of like a fun thing that she was doing. She had a tough, freshman year at her new school, and so she was like, "Oh, I got this new cat, and so we'll just like dress her up and play around with her, take some pictures." And then it like took off, and she didn't let anyone except like her family and the people close to her know that it was her account because she felt like people would not take her seriously. Actually, there's a little picture of the cat, if you could see. That's Eartha Kitty. And so Eartha Kitty is, her internet cat, and the cat is just Selma at home. And so the cat has these two identities, and Marva feels like she sort of has these two identities because she's like, no one will take me seriously if they know I have this, internet cat account, even though she's using the cat to help, tell people to vote and help campaign and do all of that stuff. But then she sort of comes to terms with like, her dad mentions like when he meets Duke, he's like, you should tell him, about your cat. The cat's missing, and so Duke just thinks that the cat is just Marva's cat. He doesn't realize it's this internet cat that he knows also. And so as she's thinking about, why she named her Eartha Kitty, she learns about, she remembers when she learned about Eartha Kitt's politics. She just thought Eartha Kitt was sort of the sex symbol, actress, singer, entertainer, and did not realize that Eartha Kitt was in fact like a real activist and was fighting for a lot of groups, besides just Black Americans as well. And so she sort of thinks, well, if Eartha Kitt can have like these kind of two sides that people may not know about her, then like I can have an internet famous cat and be like a really serious, person who's on my way to becoming, Secretary of State one day.
Yeah, the technology is real, right? The way that teens use it constantly. And Brandy, I'm like you. I want to set every book in the '90s just because, for lots of reasons. One reason is like, oh, they didn't have cell phones, so yeah. And so in the book, there are racist memes, and when I was researching the novel, one of the things I did was visit some high schools in the suburbs of Boston, and I spoke to groups of students, and a lot of them shared the fact that a lot of the anti-racist sentiment like comes across over social media from anonymous accounts. It's like safe, it's cowardly, but it's like people are using that because originally I had written in a draft that someone wrote something on someone's locker or something, and it just didn't feel current, and it was like, no, they would post something online from an anonymous account. So someone posts a picture of Shaun, who's the star of the basketball team. They post a picture of him with a noose around his neck, and it goes viral. And then someone posts a picture of Liliana's face on a piñata with the words, "Go back where you're from." And these start circulating and going around, and that was kind of the tipping point for her, where she's like, I'm at a crossroads. Like I can either like step up or not. And really, there was just one choice. She took that stumbling block and made it a stepping stone for her, and realized like if her father is literally trying, see, I said literally, trying to like cross the U.S. Mexico wall and come back to his family. She can speak up about what's happening at her high school.
Yeah, I have a really weird relationship with technology because like I remember not having the internet, and yet I still grew up with it. And I was a tech head, like I did IT in my day job. So like I know technology, but I'm like Brandy in that like I don't use current social media names. Like there's no Instagram, no Facebook, no Twitter, none of that. And so I like making up my own things. But so when I used Promethean in the State of Us, what I really was trying to do was like put the message out there about privacy. Because one of the things that I feel like a lot of people don't really understand, even though like we say it over and over again, is that if you're not paying for a product, you're the product. And like your privacy, like we are giving up so much of our privacy, and that really comes back to bite Dean and Dre in the butt, because they think like, hey, this is an encrypted app, like we're able to talk back and forth, and and nobody can see it, and well, that's a lie. And and I don't think that that's really all that far off, especially when we've got like there's a bill in the Senate right now to put backdoor encryption or put backdoors into our encryption so that the federal government and police state they can read encrypted devices. And like, that's the sort of thing that, I just wanted people to think about. And it was like, not even like it was one of those things where like, my editor and I, like, we needed something to drive the plot along. And I was just like, well, I think this will work because it'll be like a little secret sort of, hopefully it'll make people think a little bit about their privacy. I don't know if they did.
Yeah, it made me think about privacy. All right, and we are going to take an audience question. I think this is going to be our last question because we are sadly running out of time. But I have this question from Diane. How has the pandemic time changed your workflow and influenced your writing? I feel like that is the most, if we want to talk about writing contemporary young adult, like, are you thinking about pandemic books? Are you not thinking about books at all? How has that sort of affected your creative workflow? I haven't been writing, just to put that out there.
I've had a choice. I've had deadlines out the wazoo. So I moved into a bigger apartment because I can't afford it, but I used to write in coffee shops. And so I needed a slightly bigger apartment. I have like an extra 150 square foot of space so that I could have a little writing nook to go to. And I put colored lights up so that I could change the color of the lights to trick my brain into thinking that I was working in a different space. But yeah, it's really hard. It's hard getting the words done. It's hard thinking about books. But no, I'm not writing any book with a pandemic in it. I have no desire to, at all.
Yeah, I agree. So I also have had to write because of deadlines. I have a book that will hopefully be out next fall. It's nonfiction though, so it's been sort of interesting. I feel like with fiction, you get to sort of escape into this other world, even if it is, contemporary realistic. And I'm writing a book about the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. So it's like this event that happened 100 years ago, but also still, it makes me think a lot about the things that are still going on today that haven't changed since then. So it was tough. It was really, really tough. I felt like I wasn't writing for a while because it was just coming. Like I said, I usually write in, bursts of a lot of words, but not every day. And with this, it was just like, to use the common analogy, like pulling teeth. Like I really felt like nothing was getting done. And then, right before the deadline that I had to extend a couple months, right before that second deadline, I actually hit that deadline. And I was like, oh, I have stuff here. My brain just hasn't been able to really process what's been going on. But it's actually a real book. So that's helpful. But yeah, when I go back to fiction, I have some novels that I will also be working on after this nonfiction book. And I don't plan to write about the pandemic either. I've had some questions about that. I just feel like we're still so deep in it. Like I don't know how to process we don't know what's going to happen, and it's also, that is a real escape. It's writing about people who are leaving their house and doing, I guess the old normal. So yeah.
Oh my God, do you see it on TV? Like when people go outside, I'm like, put your mask on. And everyone's like, no, it's a movie.
I get so upset by it. And commercials will be like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh yeah.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Someone posted from my writing group, we posted a picture from a year ago and someone commented how dare you get together without masks, or something like that. And it's like, calm down, it was a year ago. But yeah, I don't think I'll write about the pandemic. I have lots of other ideas and things I want to get to. I think if that list falls short, maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I'm also have a book of essays coming out in March. It's called White Space, Essays on Culture, Race, and Writing. So it's about the white spaces I've been a part of in my life, but also the white space of the page and my journey to becoming a writer. So I'm shifting gears. I've been trying to write some short pieces to help promote that. But it's all, the material, the themes kind of are all the same. And it's just different iterations, right? Different ways of baking the same cake, I guess, maybe, I don't know. But I am excited, that said, to see what comes from this. I think it's, what's that quote I've been hearing or seeing online where it's science will get us out of this, but art will get us through it. And I like to think about that, just what's going to come out of this in terms of art and stories and ways to help us all process and move forward.
I love that. That's like the perfect note to end on. Yeah, science will get us. Science will get us. What was it? To say it again.
Science will get us out of this, but art will get us through it.
Yeah, well, and thank you guys so much for making art that has helped people get through these extremely weird, strange, difficult times. And thank you for talking about it with me. Quick reminder to the audience, if you want to buy any of these fine books signed by these fine authors, they are available through our affiliated bookseller, Mrs. Nelson's Book Company. There's a little graphic down at the bottom of the screen. You could take a look there. So yeah, buy books, support independent booksellers, keep reading, and thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zan.